Hi, Victory Kids! I'm so glad to see you. This past week has felt like forever waiting to see you again. I have literally been sleeping early just so that the weeks and the days could get by faster. Have you ever had to wait on something? It can be hard sometimes. You start to feel wiggly because you just feel like if you move, then the time will pass. I was starting to feel lonely and wondering if this week was ever gonna be here. Waiting isn't always fun, but a lot of the times there are really good things on the other side of it. I know of some people in the Bible that had to wait before they got the promise of God. Let's watch these videos to see what the Bible has to say about it.
A love that I can never deserve, but you give it anyway. You took all of the things of my past and you turned it into praise. The things I should have done and the things I should have said, they're playing on a repeat inside of my head. They try to hold me back, but you've given us a brand new day. Come on! It's all I wanna do is praise Jesus. All I wanna do is praise Jesus. It's all I wanna do is praise Jesus. Oh, I'm gonna praise you now. Even though I lost my way, I can finally see that if I give you all that I am, I'll be finally free. The things I should have done and the things I should have said are playing on a repeat, shine in my head. They try to hold me back, but you've given us a brand new day.
Hey Victory Kids, Pastor Sarah here, and it's time to go over our memory verse. This month, our verse is found in the book of Psalms, chapter 98, verse 4, and it says this: "Shout joyfully to the Lord, sing for joy and sing praises." Now, I want you to watch carefully as I teach you the motions. They go like this: shout joyfully, take your hands and put them around your mouth. To the Lord, point up, we're talking about God. Sing for joy, put your hands on your heart, and sing praises. Lift your hands up in the air. Psalm 98:4. Open your hands just like you're opening up a Bible. Pretty easy, right? Now, this time, I want you to join in and do it with me. Are you ready?
Yeah! Shout joyfully to the Lord. Sing for joy and sing praises. Psalms 98:4. Come on, guys. You ready? Let's go!
Alaba al Señor con alegría. Canta por gozo. Canta alabanzas. Salmos 98:4. Bye.
Yeah.
God's story, God's promise to Abraham. So part of God's story is about a promise God made to Abraham, and it begins like this. Once there was a guy named Abraham. He had a wife, Sarah. They didn't think they could have any kids, which was a major disappointment because they really wanted a family. But little did Abraham know that God had a very special plan for him. When Abraham was 75 years old, God promised to give him kids, and one day God would send the rescuer through his family. All God asked was that Abraham and Sarah leave their home first and follow him. Now, they had a tough choice to make: leave all their friends and trust God, or stay comfortable. This was not easy. See, Abraham really wanted kids, but was already pretty old. Sarah was getting up there too. Not to mention, she had never been able to get pregnant. So if Abraham and Sarah were going to leave their home and trust in God's promise, they had to believe that God would do something that seemed impossible. The good news is, they decided to trust that God would keep his promise. That's always the right choice. So Abraham and Sarah moved from their home to a land called Canaan. Right away, God reminded Abraham of his promise. He said, "I will make your children like the dust of the earth." Can specks of dust be counted? If they can, then your children can be counted. This was God's funny way of telling Abraham he would have a lot of kids, because nobody can count every piece of dust. Well, this promise seemed great, but after a while, Abraham and Sarah still had no kids, let alone as many as the pieces of dust. Now, they were really old. Sometimes God doesn't remind us of his promises because he wants us to learn to trust him. But God took Abraham outside at night and told him to look at the stars. He reminded Abraham that he would give him that many kids. So Abraham decided to keep believing God. He and Sarah waited again. After more years, he got impatient. This time, God told Abraham, by next year, Sarah will have a son. But by now, Abraham was 99 years old. He and Sarah had both given up on having kids and God's promise. In fact, when Abraham told Sarah what God said, she laughed. It's probably not a good idea to laugh at God's promises, but Sarah was tired of waiting and had stopped trusting. The great thing is, even if we think it's impossible, God really does keep his promises. And just like God promised, Sarah got pregnant the next year after Abraham's 100th birthday. When her son was born, she named him Isaac, which means laughter. Sarah said, "God has given laughter to me. Everybody who hears about this will laugh with me." And think about it. A really old lady having a baby is pretty funny. God kept his promise to give Abraham and Sarah a son. Even though they didn't think it was possible, it was easy for God because he can do anything, including giving old people babies. And remember how God was going to give Abraham as many children as the stars in the sky? Well, Isaac grew up and had children who had more children who had more children. This kept going and going and going. And guess who eventually was born in Abraham's line? The rescuer himself, God's son, Jesus. All because Abraham followed God and trusted God to keep his promise. And that's the story of God's promise to Abraham. So in case you missed it, here's the quick version. Abraham and Sarah were old. God promised to give Abraham kids. Abraham and Sarah waited. They got impatient. God reminded them he keeps his promises. Abraham and Sarah waited more. They got impatient again. God told them Sarah would have a baby. Sarah laughed. She had a baby. Jesus was eventually born into their family. God always keeps his promises. And that's a part of God's story.
Abraham and Sarah were told by God that he was going to give them a son. Do you know how long they waited for that promise? 25 years! That's a really long time. Can you imagine having to wait for something that long? How do you think they might have felt? What were they thinking? Maybe they were wiggly and antsy in the beginning, expecting a son any moment. But then after a while, maybe they started to forget about the promise. Or maybe they thought God forgot about the promise and asked God, "Are you there?" But God did remember and gave them a son named Isaac. No matter how we feel or what we're going through, even during times we are having to wait for something, God is there, always. The Bible says He will never leave us nor forsake us or give up on us. He is always there with us. So, let's say this together. Repeat after me. God, I praise you because you are always there, no matter where I go. Thanks for hanging out with me. See you next week.